I need not pause to say how delighted I am to be addressing you at this moment, or how thankful I am to have captured your ear. For on this day, when everyone has an opinion, a thought, an outlet for their voice, very few take the time to consider the incredible opportunity they are given by those listening. The opportunity to impact their moods and actions, to evolve their vision and elevate their viewpoints. For giving me such a noble gift, I extend my deepest appreciation to the listener. The topic of today's speech is addressing police brutality and violence in the black community. Since the chokehold death of Eric Gardner and the death of Michael Brown, a fog has lifted from the eyes of many American citizens. Many who had once vigorously defended police conduct have stepped back from the chorus lines, shocked by an ever-increasing number of incidents where facts point to obvious brutalization and overuse of force against surrendering, subdued, or even innocent citizens. They have become startled by the increasing number of images of police officers marching through American streets holding high-powered rifles, surrounding tanks and mine-resistant armor-clad vehicles, yelling and screaming at frightened citizens, terrorizing the very same people they are tasked with protecting. Over the past 6 weeks, comparable images have been broadcasted to the world from Ferguson, Missouri, prompting these slumbering activists to take to the streets, seeking not only justice for the 2 men killed by over-aggressive police officers, but overall justice for the black community, who rightly see these deaths as mere extensions of the harassment they suffer daily by those considered peace officers by the white community. Honesty and compassion compel me to speak candidly about the glaring contrast in how the white and black communities see those tasked with law enforcement, and how this difference dictates how each reacts to encounters with them. For many who've stepped back from praising the police still do not fully grasp why incidents involving law enforcement and black people often end in tragedy. The comedian Richard Pryor once gave voice to these differing views by stating plainly, "Police will put a hurting on black people. They really degrade you. But white people don't believe this. They say, those people were resisting arrest. I'm tired of the harassment of police officers." "Well," said Pryor, "that's because the police live in your neighborhood. When white folks get a ticket, they pull over and say, 'Hey officer, yes, glad to be a help.' When a black man is pulled over, he must say deliberately and clearly, 'I am reaching into my pocket for my license.'" Now this hilarious, censored retelling of the black-white police experiences sums up brilliantly the first key component in understanding how each group sees policing, that being the component of familiarity. The white citizen sees each encounter as happening between equals, one a protector and the other a protectee, a civil servant speaking to a civilian, while the black citizen sees each encounter as happening between non-equals, an oppressor speaking to the oppressed, a civilizer speaking to an uncivil. White citizens expect calm, understanding interactions where conversations may be casual and friendly. In their community, personal experiences have taught the black man to expect hostile, life-threatening encounters with police officers. They have grown to expect to be treated like criminals and disrespected. Their daily experiences say in no unconditional terms, law enforcement is aimed against you, not molded for you. Thus, familiarity is casual for whites and hostile for blacks. The second key component in understanding how each group sees policing is found in the origins of the policing systems. These origins began before the United States was an independent nation. They began with a policing system built as a Crown-approved mechanism charged with maintaining order so economic progress could be made while ensuring the population remained loyal to those in power. After the American Revolution, police were routinely called out to put down rebellions and tasked with maintaining the atmosphere required for slavery. During that time, Police engaged in acts of torture, humiliation, and degradation, ranging from breaking newly arrived slaves into the American plantation system, to stopping slave rebellions, to punishing unruly slaves and fugitive slave retrieval. When chattel slavery was replaced with the Jim Crow system, the police became a protector of white privilege in disrupting organizations unfriendly to those people benefiting from it. Now, I don't want to give the impression that such acts were limited to the South. During this time, all across the nation, desegregationalists, black nationalists, communists, socialists, anarchists, labor unions, and general reformers were targeted by these protectors of the law. Police officers exacted punishment in the form of physical injury, internal turmoil, exile, and assassination. These tactics were continuously used throughout the early 1900s, shattering, disrupting, and injuring grassroots organizations considered to be threatening to the moneyed interests of the time. During these years, there is an understanding among most non-wealthy Americans. They recognized, but did not always acknowledge verbally, that the police were the viceroys of commerce. They served power, they protected privilege, and were not the layman's friend. How, then, did the perception of police change from proletariat enemy to proletariat protector? To answer these questions, we must again traverse back to the feudal days of the nation. You see, during Americans' colonial years, a coalition arose which threatened to unite European Americans suffering under the Crown's dictatorial rule, African Americans suffering under the colonialist slave laws, and Native Americans being displaced by colonial expansion. The Crown responded to this threat by employing a divide and conquer strategy, offering jobs to many Euro-Americans in exchange for their loyalty and their help in dispersing the coalition. Many of the jobs offered and accepted placed the former coalition members in positions of punishment and power over their former coalition partners. They became enforcers of Crown rulership, appointed by colonial administrators to maintain order, protect the establishment, and serve the objectives of those in power. Here we find the original concept of law enforcement, not as a bastion of social welfare set forth to eradicate social ills, creating the foundation for a more perfect union, but as a middle class wedged between the exploitative upper class and the exploited lower class. As said earlier, this heritage was drawn upon to build the industrial policing system, which lingered well into the 1900s before being transformed by the post-World War II hysteria over communism and the social upheaval resulting from the demand for the end of racism. The transformation further emphasized the cruder aspects of policing, relying more on infiltration, torture, and counterinsurgency tactics to dissolve hardened opposition to the oligarchs they were sworn to protect. Policing in our modern era has revealed itself to be solely counter-revolutionary, concerned more with upholding the status quo than progressing society beyond its stagnancy. This dedication and the resulting social consequences form the true foundation for the angst, frustration, and distrust the citizens of Ferguson rebelled against. The inner tensions of knowing their plight is not governed by their ability, but administered by forces uncontrolled by their hands. This fact is made clearer when we take a look at the imbalances within the intergovernmental structures in and around Ferguson. In a community where 67.4% of the residents are black and 28.7% are white, 5 of 6 city council members are white, 6 of 7 Ferguson fluorescent school board members are white, and of the 53 law enforcement officers within the police department, only 3 are black. Many leaders have linked these disparities to low voter turnout. However, evidence abounds suggesting high voter turnout might not result in different circumstances. When the majority white county controls the purse strings of the municipal government, appoints the political candidates competing in local elections, and sets the educational agenda. Voting can only accomplish superficial successes. One needs only to think about the resignation of the first black superintendent of the Ferguson Fluorescent School District, Dr. Art McCoy, who was seemingly forced out by the all-white school board after a tense 3-year tenure, to see this point illustrated. There is no doubt in my mind the residents saw this move as a warning. Community representatives would play by the rules set by the majority or be removed from their posts. By this move, the county government told the residents they were powerless. They were told they had no advocates to whom they could direct their desires through. They were and would always be at the mercy of the system controlled by those who didn't look like them or think like them. Imagine with me bearing such disgraces beyond your childhood, beyond your teenage years, into your adult years, holding hope deep within, wanting change, listening intently to media figures who promise a new movement to solve the disgraces you have witnessed, only to see inaction on their part and failure for those in political office trying to arrest such indignities. Would this not spark anger within you? Would you not harbor resentment towards those who maintain the failure? Would you not fume day in and day out with emotional discontentment so strong your entire being would convulse whenever an indignity was directed at your person? Oh, these questions, these deep personal questions, demand our attention, for they clarify the tension within the community of Ferguson. They make clear why Michael Brown's death evoked such a public display of grief. Protesting made visible the deep and poignant distress within the community, brought about both by the taking away of this young man's life and by the long-term depravity of equality and dignity expressed within the system controlling it. The outcry of no justice, no peace spoke loudly to the tiredness felt within each citizen who saw themselves laying on the street in place of Michael Brown. Their thunderous cries shook the inner cores of their oppressors, who knew upon hearing the slogan that their tiredness had been replaced by resolve. Even more frightening to them was the cracks which appeared in the foundation of complacency which had long gripped the minds of Ferguson's residents. This fear colored the response by both local and regional police departments, who sought to reestablish the powerless principle the residents had lived under before the shooting. Statements by Governor Nixon demanding peace before justice revealed this goal. They also revealed how insignificant the pursuit of justice was. Data had long since existed which proved beyond the shadow of a doubt that disparities in community treatment by the police existed, yet nothing was done. The governor's call, therefore, for peace before justice was an Orwellian call for repression. So the status quo could be reestablished. Peace was his forethought. Justice was his afterthought. Sadly, but predictably, the mainstream media readily accepted this narrative as a central theme, pondering when security might be reconstituted within Ferguson, and explaining police protester interactions in a law and order context. Police, particularly those called into the area after peaceful protests escalated to property damage, were given tactical leeway. Overuse of force was often couched in the language of necessity. Replays and reminders of the property damage was subtly offered as critical commentary played over the images. Sensational claims of Molotov cocktails and roaming bands of troublemakers disguised as peaceful protesters, disprovable by eyewitness accounts, nonetheless were repeated, offering justification for repression by any means necessary. This occurred while similar, provable claims brought to some alternative media outlets of white supremacist activities in and around Ferguson, the harassment of local leaders attempting to organize the citizenry into a cohesive coalition to deal with issues long-standing within the community, and the uniformed social media troll offensive which spewed anti-Mike Brown language, disparaging Ferguson supporters and characterizing Mike Brown as a thug who, quote, got what he deserved, were ignored by the mainstream press. The press, like the governor and the local police departments, became protectors of the status quo, demanding its reconstitution instead of champions for justice. I must press on here to answer some of the inquiries placed before the outraged Ferguson community by politicians, conservatives, and critics, beginning with the most poignant question and demand. Why doesn't the black community show similar concern and outrage when blacks kill other blacks? Where is the mass action to support the ceasing of black-on-black violence? The fact is, many communities, once devastated by crimes committed by and against residents, pulled together in the immediate wake, asking for a ceasing of the bloodshed. Clergy members, elders, students, politicians, and sometimes even members of law enforcement convene mass gatherings wherein issues surrounding the crime are discussed and solutions put forward in hopes of provoking actions on a wider scale. Unfortunately, these events are scantily covered by the mass media, and when they are, very few follow up with the participants, especially those holding public office, to ensure the demands and suggestions made by the communities are being responded to. There are many reasons given for the lackluster coverage, one being many newsrooms are staffed with individuals from outside the communities in which these crimes are happening. Another being the lack of resources dedicated to actual news coverage. And still another is the spectacular nature of news coverage. The slogan, "If it bleeds, it leads," sums up the callous nature of the infotainment business. None of these problems can be adjusted by the black community alone. Addressing them would require mutual engagement by the community and the media system. Still, even if these problems were to magically disappear overnight, the community would find itself slighted by the systemic problems of minimizing the chief causes of black-on-black crime and the widespread anxiety fueling it. These causes are rarely broached by the media, thus they are left unresolved. They include low economic opportunity, mass incarceration, mass criminalization, especially of young black men and women, poor cultural education, and the vestiges of white supremacy, the key component to the maintenance of the systemic racism. Eliminating such systemic ignorance would demand a reformation of the entire media system, changing its concerns to social justice, social welfare, and public accountability, rather than celebrity gossip, political jockeying, and the games of empire. Without such a change, I suspect, the national news, plagued by fears of rekindling 1960-style uprisings, will continue magnifying controversy and belittling systemic confrontation. At this point, I would like to move, beyond addressing the concerns of faceless critics to addressing the comments of one minister, Jonathan Gentry, who, shortly after the Ferguson uprisings began, posted a video on YouTube which subsequently went viral and garnered him national attention via the conservative media networks. I have heard no clear message addressing Minister Gentry's comments. Thus, I feel it is necessary and important for someone to answer his video and the accompanying interview he gave on Fox News, point by point where possible, and altogether when necessary. My aim here is not to disparage his character or dismiss him merely as some systemic Uncle Tom or Sambo figure, lacking sympathy for the community at large. Compassion demands me to approach Minister Gentry's comments with understanding and appreciation in hopes of seeing what he means within what he says. It is from this view that I reject the accusations lobbed toward him as grievous and untrue. Having looked upon his face, contorted with passion-filled anger, chastising President Obama and other government-sanctioned leaders for not doing more to curtail the violence ravaging Chicago, I see within him a heavy heart worn down by unrelenting suffering, a heart under siege by a lifetime spent watching others make choices counterintuitive to those which came so easily to him. I believe his statements are born from a deep frustration, fueled by a gut-wrenching compassion and mind-numbing intellect, straining to find purpose within the madness he encounters and consumes on a daily basis. His words spell out this frustration, and his movements enunciate it. His commitment to the ministry of Jesus Christ almost certainly promises such a burden, and yet there remains doubt in my mind Mr. Gentry understands the damage he may cause by making some of the statements he's made. In analyzing his video and the subsequent interview on Fox News, I believe his message can be dissected into three distinct points. 1. The black community has been stuck in a self-pitying, self-destructive, white-blaming pattern which they themselves are culpable of. 2. Change within the community must begin with the community. And 3. Michael Brown was shot because he chose to rebel against the officer's command. In doing so, Michael Brown exhibited sinful and arrogant behavior. Let me say at the outset, in addressing these points, I seek to extend an opportunity to Minister Gentry and other critics who think like him, asking them to reconsider their positions. I hope my comments, taken together with compassionate meditation and reflection, open the hearts of him and his ilk to new revelations and realities. To his first point, I must admit, I agree wholeheartedly with the notion that the black community has been stuck in a self-destructive pattern. However, I disagree with the accompanying white-blaming, self-pitying reasonings. I also believe Minister Gentry overstates the weight black responsibility bears on the plight the community now finds itself in. Yes, blacks have a responsibility to improve their communities. However, hopeful visions cannot blossom into dynamic improvements if the soils are rocky with recalcitrant forces. Like the media, these forces work to maintain status quo conditions. Yet, unlike the media, their actions aren't publicized and remain covert and deniable. A comprehensive list naming these forces and detailing their exploits would require a platform much broader than this one. However, such a list would have to include the following recalcitrant causes: government and corporate interference in discouraging goals unaligned with their aims and objectives, dissident group fragmentation and co-option, cultural diversion, and economic warfare. Minister Gentry seems unaware of these outside factors, bypassing them in the external responsibilities brought by them. He does this in order to instruct the black community to follow the proclamation God set forth in Deuteronomy 2:3. Ye have compassed the mountain long enough, said the Lord. Turn ye northward. Minister Gentry follows this statement with a personal challenge, commanding those who are engaging in civil unrest in Ferguson to, quote, change, questioning when are we going to change and when are we going to overcome, referencing the song We Shall Overcome, a staple of the civil rights movement. Two questions immediately came to mind when I first heard these statements, both needing answers before Minister Gentry's comments could be fully digested. What were people trying to overcome when they sing this song, and what is the full context of the quote the minister used? The minister might have done well to gather his thoughts concerning Ferguson around the biblical quote he discharged, for there is great hope and instruction in the second chapter of Deuteronomy. After spending 40 years circling Mount Seir, a fate they were sentenced to after disobeying God's commandment, the Israelites are commanded from the wilderness into kingdom after kingdom, avoiding battle so as not to devastate their population, until finally they reach the borders of King Sion's land, which God had promised to them. A battle ensues in which they are victorious, and they go about settling the land and building the beginnings of a community. There are a trinity of considerations which, upon contemplation, makes clear the relevancy of this chapter to blacks today. 50 years has elapsed since black uprisings turned from peaceful demonstration to property-targeting riots. 40 years has elapsed since black culture, deeply rooted in our African heritage, was being hailed as a necessary tool for black worth and dignity. And finally, 40 years has elapsed since liberation groups were actively drawing people together, directing them towards the promised land. Since these glorious days, the black community has wandered without aim and purpose. These considerations are only bolstered by 4 lessons gleaned from this chapter. The first lesson being the need for sober, divinely inspired leadership. Moses is the conduit God uses to take the people into and out of the desert. He is the conduit God uses to sustain enthusiasm during the faith-sapping staleness the journey demanded. Where among the supposed leadership of today is there a Moses or a descendant of Moses to lead the people from the wilderness? Where among them is there one led by divine proclamation, not greed or status? One who is ready to carry the cross of prophetic wisdom and the mantle of ancestral courage? Where among them is one with this honor and vision? The answers to these questions harden the hope that a way out of the wilderness could be found. If in a moment of glee you, Minister Gentry, offer yourself to fill that void, the statements within your video sabotage your offering. For you too are motivated by your house in the valley, your BMW, and your expensive suits. Moreover, a minister cannot expect respect when referring to those he is criticizing as Curious Georges on Red Bull. The second lesson to be taken from this chapter is the perilous journey undertaken to complete the building of community. The journey embarked on by Moses and his followers included negotiations, avoiding worthless squabbles, settling old strife, and engaging enemies on terms decided by the journeying party. This brilliant story illustrates the internal-external conundrum balance which needs to be maintained in order to found a new community built on righteous principles. The third lesson to be taken from this chapter is one of strategy and preparedness. Moses' venture into Mount Seir to purchase food for money and purchase water for money, all the while avoiding conflict with the people who were afraid of the Israelites, represents a brilliant metaphor of building trust between hostile familiar groups. A much-needed tool if the community is going to evolve beyond the current state it is in. Strategy by way of preparedness and patience was demonstrated when Moses and his ilk waited 30 years for an entire generation of warriors to perish from the Ammonite camp. The fourth and final lesson to be taken from this chapter is one of divine vision. Though his destination was not known, Moses knew what his destination was, a homeland for his people. What can we say is the destination of the black community? What, can we say, are the means in which we will arrive at that destination? These are important questions, posed by you in some form or manner during your video, yet they were lost amongst a tirade of insults and frustrations. Beyond these lessons, I am drawn to Deuteronomy chapter 1 and the remarks of Martin Luther King Jr. to answer the question, what were people trying to overcome when they sang, "We shall overcome"? From Deuteronomy 1:7 through 10 and 1:12 through 13 we read, God said to Moses, "See, I have set the land before you. Go in and possess the land that I swore to your ancestors, to Abraham, to Isaac, to Jacob, to give to them and their descendants after them. At that time I said to you, I am unable by myself to bear you, the Lord. Your God has multiplied you so that today you are as numerous as the stars in heaven. How can I bear the burdens of your disputes all by myself? Choose from each of your tribes individuals who are wise, discerning, and reputable to be your leaders." From these verses, we are forced to confront the reality of organizational integrity. Moses, having found the commandment to claim the inherited land too great to bear himself, delegates the heavy burdens of leadership to the most wise and trustworthy within the community, taking them on as both advisors and conductors. In making this decision, he further strengthens the ability of the community to arrive at its destination. Where can we find such an organization today? Of the organizations in existence today, those on a national level, what type of leadership are they developing? Where are they leading us? In the answer to these questions, Minister Gentry, we find your metaphor. They have led the black community to well-toiled land, a land tired of usage, a land too sick to sustain the people living on it. The land we should aim for is captured in King's last speech. The land would be prosperous for all. It would be a peaceful land where want is abolished, hunger is forgotten, and war is a silly card game. In the final analysis, when the book is closed on this nation and Western civilization as a whole, it will be written that the community tried not only to gain personal freedom in a political, economic, and social sense, but tried to free humanity from the follies of poverty, war, and hierarchy. These are the three evils of society that our community was trying to overcome. I must rush on here to discuss Minister Gentry's second point. Change within the community must begin with the community. As I said earlier, this is a point no one can argue about. Change within any society, nation, community, or culture must begin within its own borders. However, no society, nation, or community exists in a vacuum. Yes, there are things the community can and must do for itself, such as educating the next generation about previous generations, developing a strong internal economic plan, building cooperative businesses, and restructuring the living conditions of those within the community. But there are many things the community cannot do. For instance, resources to build new houses, schools, factories, parks, and other structures would have to be purchased from outside the community. If external communities are hostile to this internal goal, then such needs will go unfulfilled, or projects to accomplish such ends will be sabotaged. Moreover, any plan for recreating, revitalizing, and reconstituting communal life around cultural-friendly, heretically sound principles would have to include the individual community aspirations of the residents within its borders. The structural integrity therein must conform to this dictum and none else. The minister does not offer any suggestions on how to establish a foundation for these two gigantic tasks, nor does he show an inner grasping of the conundrum presented by attempting to initiate such a task. I would implore the minister to research the consequences undertaken by the government when attempts to create a community culture rooted in heretically sound principles were initiated in the 1960s and 70s. I would also ask the minister to examine the history of the black community structure. I would hope humility enables the minister to see how different the aspirations of the community are from his. While he cherishes independent neighborhood living where the individual endeavors are the primary focus, many within the black community cherish communal living where cooperative endeavors incite the soul. The final and most revealing point the minister makes is Michael Brown's death was brought about by a sinful arrogance, rebellious attitude directed at the officer, saying, if Michael Brown and his friend would have just moved to the sidewalk like the officer asked, then we would not be here. If you, Michael Brown, would have just moved to the sidewalk and obeyed, we would not be here. He does this, then quotes the first line of 1 Samuel 15:23. For rebellion is no less a sin than divination. And using this verse, Minister Gentry brands Michael Brown as a rebel against God's word. This is illustrated more clearly when we read Samuel 15:23 in its entirety. For rebellion is no less a sin than divination, and stubbornness is like iniquity and idolatry. Because you have rejected the word of the Lord, He has rejected you from being king. By omitting the last sentence and a half, the minister confines his criticisms within what appears at first to be sound evidence, magnifying this mood moments later by quoting Providence 15:1. A soft answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. He then instructs all black men who, quote, didn't do nothing, to swallow, quote, their pride, or their arrogance rather, allowing any police officer pulling them over in a car or stopping them on the street to do, quote, whatever it is that they have to do. Humble yourself, he says. Someone must do this. If we, black people, swallow our pride, he insists, then we will get ahead. When viewed through the prism he offered in 1 Samuel 15:23, his words take on frightful meaning. They reveal a tragic incomprehension. The minister sees the officer as an emissary from God. He sees the structure permitting the officer to stop blacks for any reason as divinely inspired, and Michael Brown as a transgressor who in biblical sense rejected the word of the Lord, and thus was rejected from life. The minister, who on Fox News called himself a speaker for humanity, does not see Michael Brown in the same divine light as he sees the police officer, insulting him and others who've experienced unwarranted contact with the police by speaking in a voice harpooning back to the days of blackface. While I stick to my earlier statement, which hung such acts on a burdened and heavy heart, frustration over his repeated use of this ill-characterizing voice compels me to appeal to the minister's commitment to the ministry of Jesus Christ to engage in rigorous soul-searching. For it is apparent that he relies heavily on an unfortunate demonization of the oppressed in the ghetto rather than seeking to carry out the suggestions he sets forth in conjunction with the cooperative aspirations of the community he claims to be a part of. Minister Gentry, though your heart is heavy, be not moved by your frustrations. Know the true meaning of agape, Ubuntu, and koinonia, and spread them to those who most need them. I must close now, but I want to leave you with this lasting thought. Many called Trayvon Martin the modern-day Emmett Till. He alerted the nation to a disease festering within its social body. Stunned by the racist reality it exposed, many became consumed by denial. But like Emmett Till, the raw emotions felt by Trayvon's untimely death did not leave the black youth experiencing harassment by police officers on a daily basis, nor did it leave those who sought to ignore its demands for attention. Michael Brown, like a nerve ripped open by the growing decay brought about by a progressively worse disease, shattered the denial and normalcy within the bodies and minds of those among us who want a better tomorrow. Let us hope, as we move forward, as we move towards the future, we can use our new alertness to cure once and for all the disease of racism and police brutality. Thank you.